The world's a pretty big place. With our busy lives, no reasonable person can be expected to keep up with the biggest headlines each week, so I'm here to do it for you. This is Tony Pearson coming to you on behalf of WHIP with this week's Big Picture. As we usually do, I'm going to start things off in the US today. As I'm sure you guys have noticed, almost every week there is some kind of new controversy with the White House. I'd try not to report on most of them because honestly, I think that a lot of them are kind of superficial, and I feel like everybody's going to get desensitized to it, which means that when real controversy happens, the people who need to hear about it the most, which I think are the people who support the White House right now, probably won't buy it because they're so used to being told, be outraged over golfing incident or something like that. And I just think when you talk about every single little controversy, treating the president almost like he's a celebrity, I don't know. I think it devalues the stuff that really happens. But even with that, I guess, filter in mind that I tried to apply to the things that I report, it feels like every single week there is something legitimate to report on, and this week is no different. For this week, the issues are once again about talks with Russia, just a different person. Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced on Thursday that he is going to be recusing himself from the investigations related to the 2016 presidential campaign. As Attorney General, Sessions oversees the Justice Department and the FBI, which means that he would have some involvement or at least oversight of these investigations. And following new developments, Sessions thinks it's a good idea to not play a part in them due to potential conflicts of interest. Now, these calls are happening because it just came out this past week, March 1st, I believe, is when some of the reports first gained traction, that Sessions spoke with Russian ambassadors twice last year while he was still a senator. At the time, he was also one of Trump's top foreign policy advisors. Now, as we talked about when all this stuff went down with Flynn, you're allowed to talk to foreign powers as a member of government. It makes sense. It's a part of your job. I mean, in the case of Sessions, he also spoke with British, Korean, Japanese, Polish, Indian, Chinese, Canadian, Australian, and German ambassadors at the time. Not entirely out of what's standard given that position. The problem comes up in that one, right now, it does seem that there was Russian involvement, specifically Russian influence of the 2016 election, which has everybody uncomfortable. But two, it's that people keep lying about this stuff. And that's what it seems Sessions did. At his Judiciary Committee confirmation hearing on January 10th, Sessions was asked, in short, what he would do if he learned about explicit Russian involvement with Trump's campaign. He responded by saying, "I'm not aware of any of those activities." Then he went on to say, "I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and," this is the damning part, "I did not have communications with Russia," or specifically with Russians. So it now seems that that was a lie, because we know Sessions did have communications with Russia while he was working with Trump's campaign. The problems we're facing now are that, one, we don't know what was discussed, unlike with Flynn, where the contradiction also came to what was discussed. He had said that sanctions were not discussed, and they in fact were. With Sessions right now, we actually don't know what the discussion was. The bigger problem, and the problem that is going to get him into trouble, and what I believe is the reason probably why he's chosen to recuse himself, is that he made these claims while he was under oath. And that's perjury. That's a crime. In fact, I believe, depending on where the perjury happens, that can even be a felony. In any case, it's really not good. Now, you can argue that something like this isn't perjury by saying that your intention wasn't to lie or that you did not know you were lying, which is what it now seems like what Sessions is trying to claim, but ultimately this puts him in a pretty bad spot, especially given the current track record in which Trump's White House has repeatedly denied contact with Russia, whereas mounting evidence shows that that's just not the case, that there is at least some contact that has happened. It's just kind of, it's a something storm right now. The reason why it's got a lot of people like myself uncomfortable is just that they haven't been transparent about it. If Trump's White House had come out and said at the beginning of all this, hey, We've got reason to believe that the party we are running against has been doing, XYZ bad things, and Russia has come and they've shown us this evidence, and now we're going to show it to you guys. It would leave less of a bad taste in my mouth, because at least then I would know. Then they'd be being upfront with the American people. Whereas what's happening now is it seems that there's some kind of collusion. There's at least dialogue going on, and even that has been denied left and right until documents come up showing that that's not the case. And then in that specific scenario, an allowance is made. Oh, well, I guess we talked to them then, excuses XYZ why we didn't tell you about that sooner. It just seems dishonest. And when you get dishonest about stuff like this, relations with foreign powers, especially foreign powers that have a vested interest in kind of undermining the stability of U.S. democracy, which Russia does, they are kind of our number one ideological enemy right now and have been for the better part of the last century. It just doesn't look good. That's not a relationship. That's not a policy. That's not a level of transparency that looks good. In fact, it looks very shady. Over the election, I attacked Hillary Clinton and her campaign for very similar things. In her case, it was collusion with media and business, and getting away with some things that I don't think you can get away with without a position like hers. But because I was so harsh on her, I'm going to be harsh on our administration now, because what I'm seeing, it just does not look good. I personally think we should hold our leadership to a higher standard. And the fact that they seem happy to, once again, deny this stuff until hard evidence comes out and then create an allowance for it. We've now seen this twice, and at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if it happens again every single week until we're just out of people to learn about this stuff about. I don't know. I'm concerned. And frankly, whether you are for or against the White House right now, I think you should be concerned too. If you're for the White House, you should be concerned, because this kind of stuff is how people get impeached. I'm just saying there are a lot of BS calls for impeachment right now. People calling for that over, I think, every little thing. For something like that to actually get done, for people to actually lose their jobs, you have to have actual laws broken. Perjury, treason, stuff like that, those are real, actual laws. And you can get away with all that stuff. You can get plausible deniability if you're just transparent about it. And that's what the Trump administration hasn't been so far. And clearly they have no interest of changing that policy. Otherwise, I think they would have. So if you're for the White House, if they keep up this policy, that's how they're going to get themselves into real nonpartisan trouble. That's how they can get all of Washington after them. And it's already starting to happen. Republicans are jumping ship. Meanwhile, if you're against the White House, listen, I'm sure that you're loving this publicity, because it means that the leadership that you do not agree with might be in trouble. This is just not a good thing for America in general. It shows a certain fragility and weakness of our system, and I think it encourages foreign powers to... it encourages them to do the same thing that Russia's been doing. It shows that we can be influenced. It's just not a good precedent to set. So, yeah, this is kind of bad news. There have, of course, also been smaller controversies. Another thing that was revealed this past week on Thursday was that Vice President Mike Pence used a private email account to conduct public business as governor of Indiana. This also included discussions of sensitive matters such as homeland security issues. And the account was even hacked in June. Now, this is a controversy because that precise thing is what Hillary Clinton was criticized so much throughout the election for. That's actually what I criticized her for. You shouldn't be handling documents like that with a private server. You got to do that kind of stuff with the government option, just because of the security and the oversight and just the way those things are handled in general is just at such a higher standard. Granted, his position as governor of Indiana versus Hillary's is completely different. So what Hillary did was a much bigger deal at the time, but it is the same lack of judgment, the same negligence, for lack of a better word, in both cases. It's hypocritical. And frankly, I'm angry to hear this, because once again, that is something that I was very unhappy with Hillary Clinton about during the past election season. And now we've got a dude in office who essentially did the exact same thing. Finally, for the last controversy that I thought was real, that I thought was worth reporting on, especially because in one of the earlier episodes of Big Picture, right after the inauguration, I had spoken about some of Trump's plans regarding this. The Keystone Pipeline will not be using American steel. This was one of Trump's big points right after his election, that these pipelines were going to move forward regardless of protest, and that these pipelines were going to use American steel. TransCanada says that the company has already acquired the steel and that they'll be moving forward with those existing plans. In other words, they're not using American steel. Tough, they're moving forward with it. Once again, this is something that we were promised that I guess just doesn't matter now. I don't really know. There have been a few statements coming from the White House essentially saying that they didn't promise that the Keystone Pipeline would use American steel, even though there are a number of interviews and stuff like that available online right now where you can literally hear Trump say the words American steel. Once again, genuine broken promises, genuine negligence, stuff like this is what I personally have the biggest problem with, because stuff like this, I think, is what hurts the administration the most and what hurts the integrity of the office the most. I don't like it. Moving on to international news. That's right, we're just about done. Kind of done talking about American stuff. This is only somewhat related. Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, probably butchered his name at some point, is the leader of the leftist party Morena in Mexico right now. He's also seen a huge surge in popularity following Trump's election. This past week, he outlined plans to approach the UN and the Inter-American Human Rights Commission, claiming that Trump's policies against Mexicans are similar to those Hitler initially made against Jews. I personally think that might be a bit of an exaggeration, but I mean, there are also similarities to be drawn, so, hey, I'll leave that to the people who analyze this stuff a bit more. He went on to say that the neo-fascist policy of blaming foreigners for Americans' misfortunes has been a resounding failure, which, I mean, we've been trying to do that for the better part of 250 or so years now. So, yeah, I kind of agree. But he and his party have made it clear that this is their intentions. They're going to fight for this at the UN. And it's been doing well for them. Obrador and his party are currently polling as the most popular in Mexico, and he has made it clear that he intends to run for president in 2018. Now, I'm reporting on this, one, because his claims do have some clout. Like I said, I don't want to get too analytical with this, but it is very clear, at least to me, that the current administration is using immigrants in general as a scapegoat for a lot of Americans' problems right now. I mean, geez, they just started a committee, I believe, called Voice, which is going to be documenting crimes specifically committed by immigrants. In fact, in my readings on it so far, it hasn't even made it clear that it will be illegal or undocumented immigrants, but just immigrants in general. That kind of rhetoric throughout history has consistently been used by people who are trying to get away with some other kind of power grab. I mean, that's what people use scapegoats for. It turns out that when you're talking about actual proper policy, it's almost never as simple as one group of people is causing our problems. It can almost never be boiled down like that. So, needless to say, it's making people angry, and we can and should expect to see pushback from populist leaders in other countries. I mean, that's how we got here. We had a very hard push to the left in the past. I don't want to say just the past 8 years, because it's been all over the world in the past 10, 20. When you push in any one direction fast, and when you do it without a chunk of the population. There was a large chunk of middle-class America that was not on board a lot of Obama's policies, for example. You get pushback. I think that Trump is a part of that pushback. I may not agree with it, but that's what it is. The problem is now is that Trump and this administration are trying to do the same thing, but in the other direction. They're grabbing the pen and the paper and the legislative power, and they're sprinting the other way. When you do that, you get extreme pushback. The rise of this populist leftist leader in Mexico is evidence of that. It's happening fast. I'm saying this because if we continue with these policies, we can expect to see more extreme pushback. It's been a while since we've had a leftist leader that I think has been genuinely awful for a population. Generally, we've seen a lot of that in the farther to the east and in South America. That's where you get, the whole communism and stuff like that. But if this is the direction we're going to try to run it, and this is the way we're going to try to do it, these are the results we can expect to get. Communist powers tend to rise when a population is very, very unhappy, and the voices that speak at a given moment are very heavily right-leaning, the same way that you get, I don't even like to use the word fascist because of the way a lot of people are using it, but fascist-leaning, that kind of right direction powers gaining more traction when you have this hard left movement. Moderation isn't just good because, it's moderate, but also because it allows people to ease into change and you don't get as much of this knee-jerk political reaction. So, that's what's going on in Mexico right now. I'll be keeping an eye on that, and as this guy does or does not gain more traction, I'll be sure to keep you all updated. In other news, Israel, as of today, Sunday, and I am jumping the gun a little bit. This technically isn't the week that we're covering, but I woke up this morning and saw this in the news. The Israeli cabinet approved the decriminalization of marijuana use. This now means that first-time offenders will now receive a fine rather than criminal action. This is just a big deal. It is another country in the world that is decriminalizing marijuana, which I think is an absolutely important step as far as personal liberties go, but is also a no-brainer. I might do a special on it some other time because I could talk about this for hours. Marijuana pales in comparison to drugs like alcohol and nicotine, for example, which are already legal for the harm that they can do. We have mounting evidence that marijuana is far safer than tobacco and alcohol. Right now, there is an $11 billion market for opioids, which have known side effects and addiction. Doctors are essentially just throwing these large prescriptions out there. People are getting hooked on these drugs, and they are completely legal. How you can have that, alcohol, nicotine, and just a host of other things, and yet have a drug like marijuana, which does not have one recorded overdose. Even with the rise of concentrates, I mean, it's just complete hypocrisy. And it's a waste of money prosecuting these people. And it's a waste of potential revenue when you talk about the way you could tax and regulate these things. It's a headache. I mean, it's funny just to compare it to the US, where the White House has recently taken a stance against recreational marijuana. According to a new report from New Frontier Data, which has also since been cited by Forbes, legal cannabis is expected to create more than 250,000 jobs in the U.S. by 2020. That actually means it'll be creating more jobs than manufacturing in the U.S. It was worth about $2.7 billion in 2016, with sales at about $4.7 billion, and it's projected to exceed $24 billion by 2025. And this is based on the current kind of half-hearted legalization that's going on in the U.S. Cannabis is by no means legal in the United States right now. It's only in a few states. Keep in mind, this is a drug which does not have one recorded overdose, which is known scientifically at this point to have many, many uses medically for people suffering from a number of diseases ranging from epilepsy to chronic pain to even diseases like irritable bowel syndrome. It is also known recreationally to be less dangerous than drugs like nicotine, which are shown to be more harmful to your lungs and well-being in general, as well as alcohol, both in the short term and long term. Short term, you can overdose on alcohol very easily. As a resident assistant here at Temple University, let me tell you, we have learned all about the statistics and stuff like that. It is not hard to overdose on alcohol. And that's what it is. It's an overdose. People call it alcohol poisoning because it's just that common that we don't even call it an overdose. That's what it is. In the long term, alcohol destroys your liver. I mean, God, and this industry, the alcohol industry, is at about $200 billion in sales right now. I mean, it's just hypocrisy. So getting back to the story that we're discussing right now, Israel has taken a step to decriminalize it. It's now the same impact to a private citizen as like a parking ticket or something like that. That's an important step in the right direction, I think. as someone who tends to have more libertarian-leaning politics, I do think that stuff like this becomes an issue of civil liberty. So, yeah, as if all of that other evidence I just talked about didn't matter. If you care about civil liberties, this stuff should be legal because, who's the government to tell you you can't do something like this? At least until you get into the realm of stuff like heroin, which is actually destructive to lives, but heroin is just an illegal form of most other opiates. So, that stuff is legal anyway. Moving on to our last piece of news. We have some good news from a place that I've mentioned in the past a little bit regarding this, but somewhere which I'm still shocked I'm saying this today. The Chinese premier, Li Keqiang, and I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, said in a statement that China will be looking to make the country's skies blue again. This was said at the most recent National People's Congress, and it's part of a recent push for the government to work faster in making their environment policy a priority. Most of this push got its start from the public, who are very unhappy in China. For those of you who do not know, smog in China is quite literally deadly. It necessitates that people in major cities wear essentially gas masks at certain times. The skies are not blue. You can hardly even see that far. It's like living in a constant state of fog, except that fog is toxic smog. This is because when America went through a lot of the regulation change and stuff like that happened with the founding of the EPA in the latter half of the 1900s, China just kind of didn't. They just kept on their process of industrial waste and pollution. They kept on using their coal power plants. And, if you want to see what the effects of doing that look like, they got them. They are kind of the experiment of what America could have been. And I say that because right now there's a lot of pushback against the EPA, which just boggles my mind. Anyway, if you want to see what it would look like without that, China's the example right now. And it's literally deadly to be outside over there for, I don't want to say short periods of time. It's not like you're going to walk outside and keel over, but incidences of things like cancer are much, much higher because the air is literally toxic. The public knows this and isn't happy, so there has been a push for years now to address this issue, and it seems like China is finally starting to modernize in that regard. The plans being put forward include ones towards making existing coal power plants achieve higher emission standards. It also seeks to move towards power production with renewables and possibly some nuclear options such as thorium reactors, which are much safer, much easier to come by with fuel, and you can't use it to make bombs, which is also great. That's all being compared to current nuclear power plants. In any case, it seems like China is finally stepping up to the plate in dealing with its horrific environmental track record, which is good because their people are dying as a result. You can contribute a lot of the cancer and a lot of those issues over there right now to their environmental policy. Hopefully that will help to offset the 180 that the US seems to be so set on doing right now. Anywho, I hope you all enjoyed this week's episode of WHIP's Big Picture. I took a little bit of a change in structure from the past few episodes. This one was a little bit less structured. I usually write out my scripts well in advance, but this one, I still had a script, but it wasn't quite as written out because I'm trying to fit in more international news. There's just so much stuff going on in the U.S. right now. It can get kind of hard to include the complete scope that I want to get with this show, but I'm trying. So hopefully talking about Mexico, Israel, and China was a welcome change in pace. I think it was, and it was some pretty big news that we talked about today. Hopefully you all are having a great week. Hopefully you enjoy the kind of colder weather that we've been getting recently. I know I love it. I'm a cold weather dude. Also because it feels like we never really got a winter. But it's probably going to get warm again soon. So if cold isn't your thing, don't fret. Once again, have a great week. I'm Tony Pearson coming to you guys on behalf of WHIP. Until next time.